Greetings, denizens of the old world, and welcome to 9-inch Charge. Today we will be talking about the latest FAQ, covering all of the main changes, and talking about a topic that hasn't yet been brought up in the FAQ, but is causing a little bit of controversy in some of the tournament scene. Just before we begin diving into the FAQ, I wanted to take a quick moment to express my gratitude for all of you who keep coming back to watch our videos. Your support really does mean the world. And if you're enjoying what you're seeing and you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button below. It's a fantastic way to stay updated with our latest uploads, and it really helps the channel out. So thank you again for being part of the community, and now let's get back to the video and begin with the drilled rule. Lots of changes and clarification to the drilled rule. So I'm just going to go through the FAQs one by one for this and chat it out. Although it cannot make a charge move, a unit in a marching column can declare a charge. Why is this? There are several reasons. Firstly, a drilled unit that declares a charge whilst in marching column can freely redress the ranks to adopt a combat order after determining its charge range but before moving, thus allowing it to make a charge move. Secondly, units that are obliged to declare a charge in certain circumstances, those who are frenzied or impetuous for example, must do so even whilst in marching column. If they cannot make the charge move, they don't move at all and the charge is failed. This prevents marching column from being used to avoid declaring compulsory charges. Alternatively, there might be a psychological advantage to declaring a charge with a marching column. For example, the unit might cause terror, or the charge target might already be fleeing. Of course, it isn't easy to set up situations where such tactics can be used, but therein lies the challenge. So if you are drilled, after you've declared a charge, you can then redress your ranks before you make the charge. This is huge if you're in a marching column, because usually you wouldn't be able to move and make that charge even though you could declare it. This makes the drilled rule really great on units that you want to carry in a marching column. I'm thinking of dwarves, being able to move them up the battlefield a bit quicker and then still get a charge afterwards in your next turn. I've seen people use the drilled rule in all kinds of different ways, and I think probably the most important thing to pick up here is that you measure your charge distance, you declare your charge, and then you make the drilled move after that. Because I have seen some people use drilled to move their unit and reform it so that they can get line of sight to then make a charge they wouldn't have been able to make initially. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, because it says you can redress the ranks if you have declared a charge. The next question about drilled is, can a drilled unit redress the ranks before giving ground? And the answer is yes. A unit that gives ground is not a fleeing unit. Note that, as mentioned previously, should any part of a unit cross beyond the edge of the battlefield whilst it is giving ground, the entirety of it is removed from play and counts as having been destroyed. It is intentional that a drilled unit might be able to avoid this fate. So that's pretty cool that it can save you from going over the table edge and being wiped. But I think there are other ramifications of this as well, because could, for example, redress the ranks to put more units in the fighting rank and then give yourself more attacks in subsequent rounds of combat. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to cover about drilled, and next we're going to talk about frenzy. And frenzied units, man, do they really want to get into combat. And Games Workshop, through these FAQs, seem to be trying to remove barriers to get them into combat, people trying to block them and things like that. But let's get into the first FAQ. If a drilled unit in a marching column has to declare a charge due to being frenzied or impetuous, can it choose not to use drilled to redress the ranks and adopt combat order? If a unit is able to redress the ranks, i.e. there is space for it to do so, no. A unit that is obliged to charge must endeavour to make use of any special rules it has in order to charge. The unit just really wants to charge, and it will play the game without you if it has to. But as previously stated, if your frenzied unit is in a marching column and it doesn't have drilled, it does have to declare the charge, but it will not make it. It will stay where it is. Next, does a unit that has to declare a charge due to being frenzied or impetuous have to do so if a friendly unit of skirmishers lies between it and the potential charge target, obstructing its movement? This is something I've read a lot about, particularly with Wild Riders. People are doing this, and the answer is, if there is a chance of the skirmishers moving so that they are no longer an obstruction, i.e. if they declare a charge, for example, yes, otherwise no. So if you're trying to block your frenzied unit from charging with a unit of skirmishers, they then have to charge to get out of the way to enable your frenzied unit to charge. And next, if a unit with Frenzy or Impetuous has 2 movement characteristics, for example, it can also fly, does it have to use the Greater when determining if it must declare a charge? And of course the answer is, if it is able to use the Greater, then yes, it must. Tactically, you might not want it to, but a Frenzied Chaos Lord on a Mighty Dragon doesn't care about your tactics, which seems to make sense. So really, if you take a frenzied unit, it is going to do absolutely everything it can to get into combat, and it's going to be much more difficult now to slow them up or to stop them. Personally, I think the best way to stop them at the moment is with use of terrain, because you can't declare a charge if you can't see something. So if there's line of sight blocking terrain, try and use that to your advantage, because it seems now if you try and block them with your own units will then have to move out of the way so that they can still charge. There are a couple of rules clarifications for Frenzy as well that I'll just cover briefly. So the first one is, if a unit that is subject to Frenzy becomes subject to Frenzy, does it gain an extra attack, i.e. 2 attacks? And the answer is no. Frenzy doesn't stack. And the next one is about Frenzy's interaction with the spell Earthen Ramparts, which says, if a unit upon which Earthen Ramparts has been cast, is it obliged to declare a charge? Must it do so, and can it make the charge move? And Earthen Ramparts doesn't prevent a unit from declaring a charge, but it prevents it from charging. So in other words, yes, the unit must declare a charge if obliged to do so. However, because the unit cannot charge, it does not move at all and the charge is failed. So there's another way to stop them from charging if you really want to. You can cast Earthen Ramparts on them. The next rule changes I wanted to talk about are all about challenges. So firstly, you've got a rules clarification, and that is, if a wizard engaged in a challenge knows and uses an assailment spell that can hit multiple enemy models, such as an assailment spell that uses a template, are multiple enemy models hit, or is just the other participant in the challenge hit? And the answer is that they can only direct their attacks towards the other participant in the challenge. So there is absolutely no spillover, and that's something that we will see later on in these questions as well. So in that vein, the next question is, if one participant from a challenge is killed, can other models engaged in the same combat direct their attacks against the survivor during the same combat phase when it is their turn to fight? And the answer is no. Even if one participant in the challenge is slain, the challenge is considered to be ongoing until the end of the current combat phase. And lastly, and probably the most significant, is if one participant in the challenge causes impact hits or makes stomp attacks, where are they directed? They are directed against the other participant in the challenge. And this is really big. So if you've got something, for example, that is on a chariot, that can issue a challenge, either a hero or a unit champion on a chariot, and you make the charge and declare a challenge, be very wary about accepting that challenge, because impact hits are huge in this edition, as we know, because they strike first. They give you extra attacks before your opponent can strike or before you strike. So a hero in a chariot is going to have a real edge in that challenge compared to a hero that is not in a chariot, because they will strike first with their impact hits before they then do their damage. It's quite interesting to see this rule, because personally I think it's a little bit counterintuitive, because I would have thought that you would have charged in and then declared your challenge, and it kind of feels like you've declared your challenge and then done your impact hits, which is a little bit backwards, but that's how it is to be played. So next I want to talk about combat with you guys. The first change is, how many attacks can a model with a split profile make if it's in the fighting rank but not in base-to-base contact with the enemy? So I've been playing this that you get 1 attack per model. So whatever's on the base, you choose an attack either from the rider or from the mount, say a horse, and then you make that 1 attack. But actually the FAQ has clarified this to be the opposite. A model with a split profile consists of not 1 model but several, all sharing the same base. Therefore, each model on the base can make a single attack. In the case of a cavalry model, for example, this would be 1 attack from the rider and 1 attack from the mount. And this is fantastic news, because we all know that inevitably the mounts do more damage than the riders. I can just see Dr. Luke Blacksall rubbing his hands in glee as Linehammer has now become even more effective. And next, can a close order unit of just 1 model claim the close order combat result? And the answer is yes, if it has a unit strength of 5 or more. which is how the bonus for close order has been changed in the Errata. But still a close order unit. It needs a unit strength of 5 or more, but that's absolutely fine if you're on a big monster or something like that. It's done on your base wounds. Next we have some changes to some magic items. The most significant is the change to the bedazzling helm, which is now only for models whose troop type is infantry or cavalry. So Games Workshop have purposefully stopped you from using this if you're mounted on a monster. I think this is a way to start to nerf this dragon hammer meta that seems to be coming out. These unkillable dragons that, you know, if they've got the bedazzling helm, they're also -1 to hit, which can be a real pain. And the next FAQ I think is pretty significant as well. And it definitely clarifies something in a way that I've not been playing. So it's significant for the way I've been playing my games. And the question is, a character mounted on a ridden monster or chariot can choose to use their own or their mount's armor save, whichever is better. If the character wears magic armor but chooses the mount's armor value, can it still claim the other benefits conferred by the magic armor? And the answer is no, you must use a magic item fully or not at all. So I was interpreting it previously that you could use the rules conferred by the item and not use its armor value. So this is quite interesting and has some interactions and implications for people who want to have their cake and eat it, basically. Use the armor value of their chariot or their mount and then get additional special rules. Next up is magic, and the first question is about the spell Spectral Doppelganger from the Law of Illusion, and how it interacts with weapons that only allow the wielder to make a single attack. And the answer is that a weapon limited to a single attack can only ever inflict a single hit, even if you use the spell Spectral Doppelganger. So very sorry for people taking Walloper's one-hit wonder. I think it's a shame really, because that combo is really funny. And next, finally, we have some clarification on how to dispel, because I'm sure you were aware that in the rulebook it says you must beat the casting roll, and in the quick guide it says that you must equal or beat the casting roll. We've been playing that the rulebook is king and beats the quick guide, and that is what they've gone for. So if you are to dispel successfully, you need to exceed your opponent's casting roll. Just good to have that cleared up. To be honest, I'm quite surprised that it took until the second FAQ to clear that up, but there we are. Finally, we have an answer. There are now FAQs live for Forces of Fantasy and Ravening Hordes, and I don't want to go into them too much. I think the only thing really I'm going to mention from them is the change to Lance formation, because it is very significant and Bretonnians are filling the meta. There's loads of people playing Bretonnians. You're going to come up against them, and this is really important to know. And unfortunately, it does give a bit of a nerf to the Bretonnian Lance formation, but only in certain matchups. So the question is, when a unit in Lance formation is engaged in combat, every model on the outside counts as being in base to base. How many models count as being in base to base with the Lance? And the answer is the full fighting rank. When a Lance charges, it pierces deep into the enemy formation, causing the enemy lines to close around it. It's very hard to show this on a table though, hence the abstraction. So there are a couple things here. Now, everything in the fighting rank that is fighting against a unit in Lance formation will get its full attacks, because it will all count as being in base-to-base contact. So if it's the Lance versus the line will all swing at its full strength, which is a bit of a nerf to the Lance formation. Although a big lance is quite wide, so maybe this won't happen all the time, but those little lances of 6, they may well get caught out by this. And I think those are all the main things that have changed. There are a couple other little changes as well. I'll include a link to the FAQs in the description so you can go and read them in their entirety, but I think those are the headlines for the main phases and things in the game that have been covered. But as I said, there's one more thing that I wanted to cover that I think has not been addressed by this FAQ, and is something that we've been interested in on the channel and in our local hobby group, and that is about bound spells. So if I bring up the rules for bound spells, you will see here that it says you may attempt to dispel a bound spell as usual. Magic items that dispel or destroy spells work as normal against bound spells. When dispelling a bound spell, there's no risk of being outclassed in the art. And it says here, a model can only cast a single bound spell per phase. Possessing a bound spell does not make a model a wizard. And then when we go to Wizardly Dispel, to attempt a Wizardly Dispel, nominate a single wizard in your army that is within the spell range of the wizard that cast the spell. The spell range varies upon the level of the nominated wizard. So, rules as written, having a bound spell doesn't make you a wizard, and to attempt a Wizardly Dispel, you must nominate a single wizard in your army that is within the spell range of the wizard that cast the spell. So again, rules as written, you cannot do a Wizardly Dispel against a bound spell that is being cast by someone who is not a wizard. So if you give the Ruby Ring of Ruin to a fighting hero or to a unit champion, or perhaps, well, not perhaps, very much more significantly, for example, the Dwarven Anvil of Doom is not a wizard, but has loads of really nasty bound spells, and this would mean that you could not cast a Wizardly Dispel against it. Now, we've not been playing that way, but there are some tournaments that have ruled rules as written in this case. So just one to think about for the next FAQ when it comes around. But please let me know what your questions would be for the next FAQ if you still have some outstanding. And also, what do you think about the clarification in this current FAQ? Let's get the discussion going and compare notes on what this means for our respective armies. And just before we wrap up, I want to give a huge shout out to some very special members of our community, Adrian K, Cedar Khan, and Scott Ross. Your incredible support on Patreon means the world to us. Your generosity fuels this channel and allows us to keep creating content that we hope you enjoy and find valuable. Thank you very much. You guys rock. And that's it for now. We will be back soon with some more Old World related content. See you next time.